Hey, deep divers. Ready for another deep dive with us today?
Let's do it.
All right, so today we're looking at nicotine.
Okay.
Um, and we're using excerpts from a university public health course.
Sounds interesting.
Yeah, so we're going way beyond, your typical smoking is bad.
Yeah. Beyond the PSA.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So get ready for some, really surprising historical facts and a deep dive into how nicotine actually works.
All right, I'm ready.
Perfect. So nicotine's history. It's a lot longer than most people realize.
Yeah, most people don't know just how far back it goes.
Exactly.
Oh.
Thousands of years.
Thousands of years.
The course material even mentions central Mexico way before, any convenience stores were around.
Right.
What were people doing with tobacco back then?
Well, it was viewed very differently back then. They considered tobacco a sacred plant. They used it in, religious ceremonies and even as medicine. They thought it could heal people.
Really?
Yeah.
So, instead of popping an aspirin, they'd be like, light up a cigarette.
Kind of like that. It's pretty funny when you think about it now.
Yeah, I guess every generation has its own version of, a miracle cure around.
Exactly. And this perceived value led to it becoming a highly sought-after commodity. When the Spanish brought tobacco to Europe in the late 15th century,
Okay.
it just exploded in popularity.
I can see that happening.
Yeah.
But I always picture old-timey smokers with pipes or cigars.
Right.
When did the cigarette become the go-to?
That's a good question. And the answer is surprisingly recently. Cigarettes, as we know them today, didn't really become popular until the 1900s.
Okay.
Before that, it was pipes and cigars, chewing tobacco snuff,
Yeah.
all those things. But in the early 20th century, cigarettes took over. And get this, in 1901 alone, over 3.5 billion cigarettes were sold in the U.S.
Wow, 3.5 billion. That's a lot.
It is.
So at what point did we start realizing just how dangerous cigarettes were?
Well, the major turning point was the Surgeon General's report in 1964.
Okay.
That report was a real wake-up call.
Yeah.
It exposed all these serious health risks linked to smoking, particularly lung cancer and heart disease.
I remember learning about that in school.
Yeah, it was big.
It really seemed like a game changer for public health.
It absolutely was. It led to government regulation of cigarettes, warning labels, and public health campaigns to try and discourage smoking.
Yeah, and it definitely had an effect.
Oh, for sure.
By 1985, lung cancer had overtaken breast cancer as the leading cause of death among women.
Wow.
That's a pretty clear sign of the impact, right?
Absolutely. It really highlights the devastating consequences of all that widespread smoking.
For sure.
Now, while cigarettes remain a major public health issue, we've also seen a rise in new ways to deliver nicotine.
You're talking about e-cigarettes.
Exactly. They're everywhere these days.
They are. They seem super popular.
Yeah, and they work by heating a liquid that contains nicotine and flavorings and other additives,
Right.
creating this aerosol that you inhale.
So are they actually safer than traditional cigarettes?
Yeah.
The big debate, right?
It's a complicated question. There is some evidence that suggests they might be less harmful than traditional cigarettes for adult smokers who are trying to quit,
Okay.
but they're definitely not risk-free.
Yeah, the course material even mentions something called e-volley.
Right, e-volley. That stands for e-cigarette or vaping product use-associated lung injury.
That sounds scary.
It is. It's a serious condition linked to vaping, and it's especially dangerous for young people and people who've never smoked traditional cigarettes.
So if you've never smoked, don't start vaping.
Basically.
Got it.
Okay.
So before we dive into addiction, let's take a step back and talk about nicotine itself.
Okay.
What exactly is it, and how does it actually affect us?
Good question. It's important to understand this to understand nicotine's addictive power.
Okay.
Basically, it's a potent chemical that gets absorbed into your bloodstream very quickly.
Okay.
When you inhale cigarette smoke, it takes about 10 to 15 seconds for nicotine to reach your brain.
Wow, 10 to 15 seconds. That's super fast.
It is. It's almost instantaneous.
That explains why people feel the effects so quickly.
Yeah, that's part of why it's so addictive. That instant rush is something your brain learns to crave really fast.
Huh.
And once nicotine is in your system, your liver starts to break it down into other compounds like cotinine,
Okay.
which is what they look for in urine tests.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
But I'm really curious about the long-term effects.
Oh,
What happens when you use tobacco for years and years?
well, unfortunately, the list of health risks is really long and really serious.
Okay.
There's a much higher risk of cancers, heart disease, stroke, lung diseases like COPD, and even diabetes.
Wow, that's a scary list.
It is. It really is. And it's not just the smokers themselves who are at risk.
Right. What about the people around them?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Secondhand smoke can also lead to all those same health problems, and it's especially bad for kids.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
The course material mentions this crazy statistic. 16 million Americans are living with a disease caused by smoking.
That's a huge number.
It really shows how big of a problem nicotine addiction is.
It is a major public health crisis. And there's another layer to it, too.
Okay.
Addiction goes beyond just the physical effects. Have you ever heard of triggers?
I've heard the term, but I'm not sure what it means for addiction.
So basically, certain places, people, or activities can trigger those cravings again. And that can make quitting a lot harder.
So like if someone used to smoke outside their office,
Right.
years later they could walk by that spot and suddenly want a cigarette.
Exactly. It can be that strong.
Wow, that's crazy how powerful those associations are.
They really are deeply ingrained.
So is there any hope? Is it even possible to quit after years of using tobacco?
Absolutely. It's never too late to quit.
Phew. That's good to hear.
No matter how long someone's been using tobacco, there are effective ways to help them break free from it.
Okay, so what are some of the most effective ways to quit? Are there any common strategies that seem to work?
Well, it really depends on the person,
Okay.
but some proven methods include nicotine replacement therapy,
Mhm.
which is often called NRT for short.
Got it.
There are also medications like bupropion and varenicline, and then there are behavioral therapies like cognitive behavioral therapy or CBT.
Okay.
They all have their pros and cons.
Right.
It's about finding what works best for each individual.
So NRT is like the patches and gum.
Yes.
You slowly reduce how much nicotine you're getting.
Exactly. NRT gives you a measured dose of nicotine without all the other harmful chemicals in tobacco smoke.
So it's like weaning yourself off it.
Pretty much. And it can help with those withdrawal symptoms and cravings.
Okay. What about the medications that you mentioned, bupropion and varenicline? How do those work?
Well, those medications work on different parts of the brain that are involved in nicotine addiction.
Yeah.
Bupropion is actually an antidepressant, but it also helps reduce cravings.
Interesting.
And varenicline works by blocking the rewarding effects of nicotine.
Okay.
So basically, it makes smoking less enjoyable.
Got it.
Yeah.
So they both aim to make quitting less awful,
Yeah, that's the goal.
but they use different approaches. So
Right.
it really is an individualized approach then.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And when you combine those medications with behavioral therapy, the success rates go way up.
Really? So what is behavioral therapy? Like, what does it involve?
Behavioral therapy focuses on changing your thoughts, feelings, and behaviors that contribute to your nicotine use.
Okay.
It's about retraining your brain.
Wow.
It helps you develop coping mechanisms for those cravings,
Right.
learn to manage stress and avoid your triggers. It gives you the tools to break that cycle of addiction.
That's amazing. So it's not just about willpower.
No. Oh,
It's about learning actual skills and strategies to change your relationship with nicotine.
Exactly. And remember, recovery from nicotine addiction. It's a journey.
Okay.
It takes time and effort and a lot of support. There will probably be setbacks along the way.
That's understandable.
But that doesn't mean you failed.
I like that. It's like learning anything new.
Yeah.
It takes practice and patience. You don't get it perfect on the first try.
That's a good way to think about it.
You keep trying.
Keep trying. And with the right support, recovery is possible.
I love that. It's encouraging to know that there's effective treatment out there.
There is.
It's not hopeless.
Not at all.
Awesome. All right, so we've talked about the history and the science behind nicotine, and even some of the struggles people face when trying to quit.
A lot of ground covered.
But we haven't really talked about social and cultural influences.
You're right. We haven't.
Those must play a big role.
Right?
Absolutely.
Nicotine use isn't just about individual choice.
Right.
It's affected by this whole web of social, cultural, and even economic factors.
That makes sense.
Things like advertising, marketing, and how different communities view smoking.
Uh-huh.
All of that can have a huge impact on whether someone starts and continues using nicotine.
It's interesting. Like for decades, cigarette brands targeted their advertising specifically towards women
That's right.
with themes of like freedom and sophistication.
Exactly. And those campaigns had a huge impact on the number of women who smoked.
I bet. And what about peer pressure?
Yeah.
Especially for younger people.
Huge factor.
Wanting to fit in is a powerful motivator.
It is. And think about all the movies and TV shows that used to portray smoking as cool or rebellious.
Oh, yeah.
That must have had some influence.
Definitely.
Yeah.
It makes you wonder how many people started smoking because they saw their favorite character doing it.
Right. And then you have the economic factors, too.
What do you mean?
Well, tobacco companies will often target low-income areas with aggressive marketing tactics and cheaper prices.
Wow.
That makes it even harder for people in those areas to quit.
So it's like a system designed to keep people hooked.
In a way,
It's
yes.
not really a level playing field then.
Unfortunately not. There are all these systemic forces at play that contribute to nicotine addiction.
And especially in vulnerable populations.
Right. We need to address those bigger social and economic factors if we really want to make progress in reducing nicotine use.
That makes a lot of sense.
Mm.
It's more than just telling people to stop. It's about creating an environment where it's easier to make healthy choices.
That's a good way to put it.
So what can be done about that? Like, what kind of changes do we need to make?
Well, we need stricter regulations on marketing and sales for sure.
So,
And we need to make sure people can afford the resources that help them quit.
right.
Things like counseling and medication. We also need to promote smoke-free policies in public places.
Yeah, I can see how all of that would help.
It's a big job.
It is, but it sounds like it could make a real difference.
It could. It takes a collaborative effort, though. Policymakers, public health organizations, healthcare providers, educators, and communities.
Wow, everyone needs to work together.
We all have a role to play.
Wow. So, deep divers, we've gone through a lot today.
You have.
We've talked about the history of nicotine, the science behind it, the social and cultural influences, even the struggles people face when trying to quit.
It's a lot to think about.
It is. The
Right.
biggest takeaway for me is just how much we've learned about nicotine over time.
Yeah.
It's amazing how much research has been done and how much we've learned about how the brain and addiction work.
It's really impressive.
I know.
Yeah.
Before we go, I want to leave you with one last thought. As we learn more about nicotine and all its effects, let's try to approach this issue with compassion and understanding.
Good point.
It's easy to judge,
It is.
but addiction is a complex disease, and recovery is a journey, not a destination.
Very true.
Let's support those who are trying to quit.
Couldn't agree more.
Let's create a world where everyone has the opportunity to live a healthier life, free from the burden of addiction.
Beautifully said.
Deep divers, until next time, keep those brains buzzing and stay curious.
See you next time.
Bye.
Bye. So your brain gets used to those dopamine surges, and over time, you need more and more nicotine to get that same feeling of pleasure.
Oh, so you build up a tolerance.
Exactly. That's what tolerance is. And when you try to stop using nicotine, your brain freaks out a little bit.
Really?
Goes into withdrawal, craving that dopamine hit.
That makes sense.
That's where you get all those unpleasant withdrawal symptoms,
Yeah.
like the irritability, anxiety, trouble concentrating.
So it's like a physical dependence.
It is, but it's more than that. It's psychological, too.
Oh, so there's like a mental aspect as well.
Exactly. Nicotine addiction is complex. It's both physical and psychological.
Nah, it's like a double whammy.
It is, like a two-pronged hook in your brain.
Wow. Okay, so we've gone from these ancient tobacco rituals
Yeah,
to the science behind cravings.
right.
It's clear that nicotine is not just a simple habit.
Definitely not.
What about the long-term consequences? Like, if you use tobacco for years and years, what happens to your body?
Well, the long-term effects of chronic tobacco use are pretty serious.
Okay.
There's a significantly increased risk of cancer,
Right.
heart disease, stroke lung diseases like COPD, even diabetes.
That's a lot.
It is. And it's not just smokers who are at risk.
Right, you mentioned secondhand smoke.
Exactly. Even being around someone who's smoking can lead to those same problems.
And it's especially dangerous for kids.
Especially for kids. Their bodies are still developing.
The course material actually mentions that 16 million Americans are living with a disease caused by smoking.
It's a huge number.
It really puts it into perspective.
Yeah. A major public health crisis for sure. And to make it even more complicated, addiction isn't just physical.
Okay.
There's also the psychological side. Have you ever heard of triggers?
I've heard the term, but I'm not sure how it relates to addiction.
So basically, certain places, people, or even activities can bring back those cravings.
Oh, really?
It can make quitting even tougher.
So, like, if someone used to smoke outside their office building,
Yeah.
and years later they walk by that same spot, they might suddenly have a strong urge to smoke.
That's exactly it. Those associations get wired into your brain, and they can stay there for a long time.
Wow. So even if you quit, you're not completely free.
It's a constant battle for some people.
So is there hope?
Yeah.
Can you really quit after years of using tobacco?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
It doesn't matter how long you've been smoking. It's never too late to try to quit.
That's encouraging.
And there are effective treatments out there to help.
What are some of those treatments?
Well, there are a few different approaches that have been proven to work. One is nicotine replacement therapy, or NRT for short.
Yeah.
That involves using things like patches or gum
Right.
to gradually wean yourself off nicotine.
Got it.
There are also medications like bupropion and varenicline.
Okay.
Those work on different parts of the brain that are involved in addiction.
Interesting.
And then there's behavioral therapy.
What's that?
That's a type of therapy that helps you change the thoughts, feelings, and behaviors that contribute to your nicotine use.
So it's like retraining your brain.
Exactly. It gives you coping mechanisms for cravings and helps you manage stress and avoid triggers.
That sounds really helpful.
It can be very effective, especially when combined with other treatments.
So you kind of attack it from all angles.
Pretty much. And remember, recovery is a process. It takes time and effort,
Yeah.
and it's okay to have setbacks along the way.
I imagine it can be pretty tough.
It can be, but with the right support, it's definitely possible.
That's good to know. It's not a hopeless situation.
Not at all. There's always hope.
I love that message. It is inspiring to hear about all the resources and how it's possible to recover.
Mm-hmm.
But you know, something we haven't talked about as much are like the social and cultural influences around nicotine.
You're right. We haven't.
Those have got to play a role too, right?
Oh, absolutely. Nicotine use isn't just about individual choices.
Okay.
It's shaped by all these social, cultural, even economic factors.
Wow.
Like, think about advertising and marketing trends, how smoking is portrayed in different communities.
Yeah.
All that can have a huge influence on whether someone starts using nicotine or continues to use it.
That's true. I was just thinking, for decades, cigarette companies specifically marketed to women,
Right.
like using themes of freedom and sophistication in their ads.
Exactly. And those campaigns definitely have an impact.
Yeah. And we can't forget peer pressure.
Especially for young people.
It's a big deal,
It is. Wanting to fit in can be a huge motivator.
for sure. And all those movies and TV shows that used to portray smoking as cool
Oh, yeah.
or rebellious,
It definitely shaped how people saw it.
especially young people
Especially young
who
people.
are still figuring things out.
Exactly. And then there's the whole economic side of things, too.
What do you mean?
Well, tobacco companies often target low-income communities with
Okay.
their marketing.
I hear.
You know, aggressive tactics and cheaper prices.
Wow.
It makes it so much harder for people to quit in those areas.
So it's almost like the system is designed to keep people hooked.
It can feel that way. It's definitely not a level playing field for everyone.
Definitely not. This has been so insightful. We've learned about the history of nicotine,
Yeah.
the science behind addiction, the social and cultural influences, even the struggles people face when they try to quit.
It's a lot.
It really is. But it's been fascinating. I think the biggest takeaway for me is just how much we've learned about nicotine and its effects over time.
It's pretty amazing.
Science is incredible.
Yeah.
It just keeps unraveling all these mysteries about the brain.
It's true. And the more we learn, the better equipped we are to deal with the challenges.
Right. Absolutely. So before we wrap things up, I want to leave everyone with one final thought.
I like it.
You know, as we continue learning more about nicotine and its impact,
Mm,
let's all try to approach this issue with compassion and understanding.
that's important.
It's really easy to judge,
It is.
but addiction is a complex disease.
It is.
And remember, recovery is a journey.
Not a destination.
Exactly. So let's do our part to support those who are struggling.
I agree completely.
Let's work towards creating a world where everyone has the chance to live a healthier life, free from the burden of addiction.
Beautifully said.
Well, deep divers, that's a wrap for today's deep dive.
Another one down.
Until next time, keep those brains buzzing and stay curious.
See you next time. Bye.
Bye.